Hi, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. Darlene's going to be moving the slides for me due to a little technical glitch. All right, Darlene, if you wouldn't mind going on to the next one. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement and an acknowledgement that I am a settler on these lands on which Memorial's campuses, university campuses are situated, and that these are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. And I want to acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. Thanks, Darlene. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a professor in the adult post-secondary program in the Faculty of Education. Next, Darlene. And what I've put together today, I'll come to the purpose in a minute, but the reason why I'm giving this presentation is because this is what I'm struggling with at the moment. So my field of research is in writing, in various kinds of writing, graduate writing, undergraduate writing, thesis writing. I started off in adult basic education and then moved into the university context, and have really spent the last 30 years in university writing context. So although I teach other courses in post-secondary teaching and learning and research methodology, the bulk of my work is in writing. Thanks, Darlene. So for those of you who don't know, I have a YouTube channel and lots of work on there to do with writing. And the point that I want to make about this is really that writing has been seen as a barrier for many students to academic success. So explicitly providing instruction on writing has been part of what I've been doing. Thanks, Darlene. So what I want to talk about today is how we can talk to students about AI, because for me, this has fundamentally, how can I put it? It cut me at the knees, basically, because, because there's an assumption that we no longer need to worry about writing anymore. And I've been struggling with how to engage students, how to talk to them, and what we can do about this situation. Thanks, Darlene. And I'm going to use this quote as a way into it, and I'll read it because it reflects what I've been experiencing. So I've given a couple of talks on AI, and they all have to do with the ethical problems with AI and also with the role of writing in AI. So in my most recent job, Victoria Livingston says, I taught academic writing to doctoral students at a technical college. My graduate students, many of whom were computer scientists, understood the mechanisms of generative AI better than I do. They recognized LLMs, large language models, as unreliable research tools that hallucinate and invent citations. They acknowledge the environmental impact and ethical problems of the technology. They knew that models were trained on existing data and therefore cannot produce novel research. However, that knowledge did not stop my students from relying heavily on generative AI. Several students admitted to drafting their research in note form and asking ChatGPT to write their articles. As an experienced teacher, I am familiar with the pedagogical best practices. I scaffold assignments. I researched ways to incorporate generative AI in my lesson plans, and I designed activities to draw attention to its limitations. I reminded students that ChatGPT may alter the meaning of a text when prompted to revise, that it can yield biased and inaccurate information, that it does not generate stylistically strong writing, and for those grade-oriented students, it does not result in A-level work. It did not matter. The students still used it. Thanks, Darlene. I found myself spending many hours grading writing that I knew was generated by AI. I noted where arguments were unsound. I pointed to the weaknesses such as stylistic quirks that I knew to be common to ChatGPT. I noticed a sudden surge of phrases such as the delves into. That is, I found myself spending more time giving feedback to AI than to my students. So I quit. So obviously, you know, I'm not going to quit, but what she says is very much what I've been experiencing, in the sense that you know, I work on my classroom activities, I work on my assessment. I'm trying very hard to communicate to students why they should you know, write themselves and not use AI. So I have made the choice that I don't want students to use AI in my classes, mostly because I'm teaching writing, but in my other classes as well. But what I'm finding is that students are using AI instead of reading, so to generate contents instead of reading, to summarize their readings, and to create literature reviews. And when it comes to writing, you know, it doesn't matter what the writing is, whether it's reflective writing, writing about experience, argumentative writing, they're still using AI to do that. And now I'm finding more and more that my thesis students, the students who are writing their thesis and doing research, are using AI to summarize readings and to generate literature reviews and to produce writing. Thanks, Darlene. So to me, there's a disjuncture about what's happening in the classroom, what's happening in student lives, and what we still have as academic misconduct, right? So this is from the library page, but you can find it anywhere. The unauthorized use of AI tools and using those tools and presenting the work as your own is academic misconduct. Thanks, Darlene. So to me, there's a disjuncture between what we understand as your own work and what seems to be this environment that has a tacit acceptance of AI use. So to me, there seems to be this increasing acceptance that it's okay to submit assignments using AI tools. And the argument is often made around employability. You know, students must use AI because then they'll be employable. And the other argument that gets made often is, well, it's here, we can't do anything, so they must use it. And the ethical issues, what I mean by the ethical issues are the bigger ethical issues around bias and around where the data comes from, you know, the intellectual property rights, the use of data without permission. Those have become more or less, you know, as Sarah Ahmed calls it, non-performative, in the sense that we might say, oh, you know, AI does this, AI is biased, but, and then we move on to actually using it. Thanks. So somehow the message students are receiving is that it's not only okay to use generative AI, even when asked not to, but that generative AI use will help them with their employability in the future. And part of these tacit values is something around the product is more important than the process. Quickest methods are best. The easier is the better. So you'll hear efficiency, AI is efficient. That means it's quicker, I guess, or it's easier. If AI can do it for you, why not? What's the point of struggling? And using ChatGPT to generate an essay will help me with employability. And I think in a way, what's happening is that we are reinforcing this in the classroom because student writing is getting better and perhaps students are getting higher grades as a result. So what I realized was that actually by focusing on writing, I was muddying the waters. I'll come back to that now. So what's happening is we've got a system that's working at odds with each other, in the sense that, we have an environment of social media and the big tech companies that are pushing AI use at every opportunity. So in every app now, in every piece of software, there is some AI components, and it's continually kind of asking you, do you want me to give you the sound bites? Do you want the summary here? So there's that pressure on the environment to use AI. And then within the university, we're in a context of cutback, time is money, focus on doing things quickly. And then we get faculty and instructors who are facing this totally new environment with very few resources, very little time to reskill ourselves. There's such an overwhelming amount of information out there. It's so hard to distill, what to do. And then, of course, you've got the students in the middle who are feeling, we know the literature on why students will, for example, plagiarize. And it's often not because they want to cheat, it's because they have got enormous amounts of pressures on them. So we've got all these elements that are, I think, creating a situation that's, that can be quite overwhelming, particularly for faculty and instructors. Thanks, Darlene. So how do we engage with this? And for quite a long time, I was focusing on writing. And then I realized actually the writing is muddying the waters. And it's muddying the waters because there is a social justice element to students using AI to write, in the sense that they are no longer penalized for their accents or their lack of grammar, or the fact that if they are students writing in another language, that they are coming into a system where they might not know how the writing works. But so if we take writing off the table, whenever I try and articulate what are we, what's happening here, I realize actually that it's about thinking skills. So I feel like there's so many issues that it might be useful just to focus on this one set of skills, thinking skills. And if we use thinking skills as a way to engage with AI, then it will work for employability, because, just putting a prompt into ChatGPT and generating a response, I can't imagine how anyone is going to go into a job and see that as a skill set that's useful. But if we focus on thinking skills, thanks, Darlene, then it changes the situation. Now, I know a lot of you already know Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm going to just go through it very quickly in case there's anybody who doesn't. But I'm only using Bloom's taxonomy to give us a vocabulary to talk about thinking skills. One of the things I realized when I teach writing is that when I say to a student, you need to write more analytically, they often have no idea what that means. So Bloom's taxonomy provides us with a way of talking about these different thinking skills. So the taxonomy was revised in 2001 and it was changed. But to be honest, I like the earlier taxonomy, especially for writing. Thanks, Darlene. If you can move on to the next one. Okay, so just, very quickly, one of the important things that the Bloom's group came up with was that you need to satisfy each lower order thinking skill before you can move on to the upper order thinking skills. So unless you can find information and describe it, it would be difficult to understand it. And unless you can find information and understand it, it's difficult to apply, and so on up the taxonomy. The top level of the taxonomy is create. And that's where writing lies. And this is why I was struggling so much to articulate why writing was important. Okay, thanks, Darlene. If you can go on to the next one. So the question that I would ask is that if a student takes an assignment topic as a prompt and generates an essay, what thinking skills are they using? So Darlene, if you can just go back to the previous slide. So what thinking skills are they using if they put a prompt into ChatGPT and generate an essay, but don't make any changes? All right, thanks, Darlene. And you can go on to the next one. So we went, a colleague and I are doing a paper on this, and we went to ChatGPT. Go ahead. And we asked ChatGPT exactly this question. How would you assess an essay? And this is what it came up with: depth and complexity. AI generated content may tend to be more surface level, especially in higher order thinking. ChatGPT might excel at providing information or answering basic questions, but might struggle with deep analysis or original thought. Accuracy and reliability, given that ChatGPT is trained on data up to 2021 and is not capable of real-time research or critical evaluation of sources, students should still demonstrate the ability to discern reliable information from unreliable sources. Thanks, Darlene. Originality. ChatGPT can generate content based on existing knowledge, but lacks the ability to create truly original insights or deep personal reflection, which are often required at the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. In conclusion, assessing a ChatGPT written assignment involves considering the depth at which it engages with the cognitive processes in Bloom's revised taxonomy. While ChatGPT can perform well at the lower levels, it may fall short in demonstrating deep analytical, evaluative, or creative skills that are required for the upper levels of the taxonomy. Thanks, Darlene. So, obviously, I'm not the only person who's thinking about this, and there's a huge body of literature out there around thinking skills and AI use. And I'm only going to focus on this one paper, but honestly, if you want to go and search critical thinking and AI, you will see there's a lot of literature out there. And the term being used is cognitive offloading. So what happens when we cognitively offload to AI? And in this quite substantial mixed method study, the results showed, obviously, that the more AI was being used, the less the person was engaging in critical thinking skills. Thanks, Darlene. So cognitive offloading is when individuals delegate cognitive tasks to external aids, reducing their engagement in deep reflective thinking. So critical thinkers can understand complex concepts, analyze texts, make well-reasoned arguments, solve problems systematically, evaluate evidence, consider alternative solutions. They are less susceptible to misinformation or misleading information and biases. So these were the results of the study. I mean, obviously, the main result was that reliance on AI tools is associated with reduced critical thinking. But there were some things that came up in the study that I think are really worth thinking about. So often we hear, well, AI is just being used as a supplement. But what they found in their study was that AI was being used as a substitute. So what that means is that when people were using it, they weren't going further. So there was reduction in cognitive effort. So these are the bigger picture concerns. so people stopped putting in the deep thinking effort because it was so easy just to get a response, but also that it led to not thinking independently over time, and what they called cognitive resilience and flexibility over time. So reduced analytical skills and critical decision making, and that it encouraged passive learning. So what they're saying is that it's not just in that instance you are cognitively offloading, but what it's doing is creating a passivity that then stops you from questioning or going further or thinking more deeply. And one of the points they made, which I think is really important, is that the more a person trusted the AI tool, the more likely they were to cognitively offload. So, you know, where I want to go with this is to bring the thinking skills back into things in our classroom practices, in a, you know, whether you engage with AI or not, that these thinking skills become key or core again. And in addition to the thinking skills, the Bloom's group also talked about the different domains of knowledge. So factual knowledge, or we could call that information, conceptual knowledge. In fact, Darlene, you can go to the next slide because I think I explain it there. Yeah. Conceptual knowledge, you know, knowledge of concepts or frameworks, procedural knowledge, which would be sequencing techniques, processes. And then one of the most important bits of knowledge that the previous study, the Gerlich study, also mentioned was that increased use of AI tools meant a reduction in metacognitive knowledge. And metacognitive knowledge is where we assess ourselves in terms of our own thinking and our own learning. And this is where self-efficacy grows. You know, the stronger we are in metacognitive knowledge, the more likely we are to persist at something, because we know we've succeeded in the past. So that metacognitive knowledge is really important. Thanks, Darlene. Okay, so where am I going with this? What I'm arguing for here is that we have a comprehensive kind of approach to what we're doing. And the first element is being very clear about where we stand on this. So that's developing a personal policy that reflects your values about generative AI use. So if you feel, you know, it's really important for your students to engage with AI, then that's part of your set of values. And perhaps what you do is articulate how they would do that. I think we need to communicate to students, you know, very clearly what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And I'll come back to some ideas a little bit later. And then that personal policy is tied to a pedagogical policy, which is linked into our learning goals. So, you know, for example, if I just take myself, my personal policy would be that I don't want students to be using AI, particularly in a writing class where I want them to learn the skills. I want them to be able to go through all those thinking skills and get to a point where they create. So it's important for me personally, but it's important pedagogically. And then to reinforce that all the way through our courses. So reinforcing it through assessment instructions, you know, regularly reinforcing, this is what I want you to do. The most success I've had with students about not using AI in my writing class was when I begged them. I literally begged them, please don't use it. I want to hear your voice. But then reinforcing your personal policy through classroom activities. So in every activity that you do, in all your assessments, you're building in these critical thinking activities. And we all know that assessment is the tail that wags the dog here. So they need to be included, these thinking skills need to be included in the assessment practices as well. Thanks, Darlene. I'll come back to that. Okay. So just some ideas on how we can build some of these things into our classroom practices or into your assignments if that's, something that you want to do. Critical literacy has been around for quite a long time. And what critical literacy theorists look at is these different readings of a text. At its most basic level is just, a functional level where you just decode the text for surface value. So for example, if you use ChatGPT to generate an assignment and you submit that, you've only read it at that functional level. The second level is where you engage higher order thinking, and this is where you're making meaning of the text. You might be engaging with it a bit more critically. So with that assignment that's been generated, you might revise that, change it, add in sources of your own, but do something with it. So that's taken it from that functional level, and now we're engaging with it in much more detail. The critical literacy level, which, the reason why critical literacy came into being was against propaganda, but also to be able to read advertising and marketing. But the critical reading is, not only what's going on in this text, but what has gone into creating this text. So this is reading against the text. What assumptions are inherent in here? Values, possessions. How could this text be read otherwise? What resistance readings could there be? So that's moving much more into the critical thinking realm. Thanks, Darlene. And I just put this in here because, every day there's something else that's coming out on AI literacy. AI literacy is really, their webinars being advertised all over the place. And this is a series of YouTube videos. So if you just search critical AI literacy, you will see a lot of material out there. But I just put it in here to show you the availability of these sources, but also to think about, because you're all from different disciplines, you would all be using this in different ways. So all I'm doing is showing how you can create an AI literacy policy for your class, just with a couple of principles that you can communicate very clearly to students. So, for example, if you allow students to use AI, then have you included an element of critique in that process? Thanks, Darlene. One of the things that I just find so difficult to understand is that, we all know that AI hallucinates and produces false information. And we know that it's a feature of the system. It's not, they're not just errors. But it seems strange to me that, many students still accept whatever is produced without, checking or without acknowledging that there could be errors. And that point that Gerlich made about trusting the AI, I think is really quite significant here. And the reason why I've put this particular article in here, it's a news article. What they did was that they took news articles that had been published online, and they used Google as a search engine to see if they could find them. And then they used 8 other AI search engines. And what they were looking for was the accuracy of the AI tools. I wouldn't call them search engines. Thanks, Darlene, if you can move on. And what they found was actually that these tools were highly inaccurate. So even though these articles had been published online, they were highly inaccurate. And I mean, the conclusion they came to is that these AI tools are confidently wrong. So I think there's something about the confidence of the response that we're getting from AI and the trust we feel in the AI responses that's creating this idea that, you know, that their responses don't need to be questioned. So I think that's something that we need to communicate to students or get them to engage in with these higher order thinking skills. Thanks, Darlene. Okay, so we're moving. I'm really what I was doing here was just giving some ideas of how you could engage in these critical thinking skills from, you know, something fairly simple into the much more complex things. But for example, if we take that whole idea of trust and being confidently wrong, and then asking the question, how do these tools shape not just what we know, but how we think and the questions we ask? And this comes from a webinar that I attended last week. So asking the bigger questions as well as the close questions around produced texts. You know, which voices are we amplifying? Which voices are we silencing? What is acceptable representation in these texts? Thanks, Darlene. Yep, that's the one. And okay, just to come back to assessment here. So I'm not, you know, even though for me, I don't want students to be using AI in my writing classrooms, that doesn't mean I'm advocating that nobody should use AI. And there are, you know, there are lots of people looking at how we can incorporate assessment, and some people have done this really well. So instead of thinking of it as an either or, it can be more along a continuum of, you know, no AI for these reasons because my learning goals are this, to full AI for these reasons because my learning goals are that. Yeah, so the point I'm trying to make is that it doesn't matter how you want to engage with AI, but if we take the focus of thinking skills and we build those thinking skills into our assessment activities, then we are at least focusing on ensuring that those thinking skills are there and that students are critically engaging with you know, AI and what they're doing. Thanks, Darlene. Again, a few assessment ideas. I certainly don't have all the answers here, but these are some ideas to push back against the focus on product rather than process. So to build in process in terms of your assessment, as well as the thinking skills and not focusing on the writing and the grammar. So that might mean requiring students to read fewer texts, but engaging them analytically. You know, requiring students to find PDFs and attach them to your assignment rather than leaving it as an open-ended find sources and, you know, including page numbers to the citations to try and encourage reading and tying the critical thinking skills into assessment rubrics so that students illustrate higher order thinking and the different types of knowledges. Thanks, Darlene. And if you're using AI, again, focusing on critical engagements. I mean, one of the things that surprises me is why students go to ChatGPT immediately. And I think we really should be encouraging an assessment of the tool they're using. You know, a couple of weeks ago, CICL had a workshop on the library databases and the AI tools attached to the library databases. So we should be encouraging students to assess the tools that they're using in order to, you know, look at the output critically. Yep, I think we've covered that. Thanks, Darlene. And again, you know, including some kind of disclosure or reflection statements. And I find this really interesting because, you know, people are now talking about including a disclosure statement, how much of AI use you've used, what tools, how did you assess them, how did you check for accuracy. But in my writing classes, I have always asked students to produce a process reflection, which is very similar to a disclosure statement. But really what I'm trying to get them to do is to think metacognitively. And I'm asking them, okay, you've produced this essay, let's say. Now I want you to reflect on how you produced it and what decisions you made to get to that point. So they're evaluating what they did and why they did it, and they're articulating it and explaining it to me. So that's a reflection piece on the process. And I'm seeing more and more integrity statements as well around things like virtue ethics or relational ethics. And you know, I don't want to go into this in too much more detail, but this is something that we could include in our policy statements, if that is something that appeals to you. Thanks, Darlene. So, you know, for example, for me, promoting the virtue of thinking deeply is really important. And just because something can be done more easily doesn't mean that that's the way we need to do it. So I really do talk a lot about the value of thinking deeply, and you know, even if there is a challenge and a bit of a struggle in there, that in the end there are more benefits to that because of that metacognition that's been a part of it. Thanks, Darlene. So, you know, intellectual virtues of curiosity, carefulness, independent thought, yeah. And then virtue ethics, if that's, you know, I've just put these in as ideas. So justice, honesty, responsibility, and care. You know, if we're going to include those, then we want to make sure that we've prepared students for that, and, you know, we are not just dumping this on them. Okay, that's it from me. Yeah, I see there are questions in the chat. Let's just see. But you're more than welcome to unmute and ask your question. I used the word cheat. I'm not big on policing students or accusing them of cheating. I would much rather talk about how we can encourage students to produce work on their own. But at the same time, there is an academic integrity policy at the university which says, you know, you can't submit work produced by someone or something else as your own. So I just find that very interesting. You know, are we changing our academic integrity policy? Is that something that's happening on the ground, that we're saying, well, it's okay for students to use AI? You know, is that what's happening?
Another question, Cecile, is do you think students are well grounded in AI at the high school level? Is it an issue there? Is it the issue there as it is at the post-secondary level? And should we be having these discussions with NL schools?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I do think we should be having these discussions at the school level. What was so interesting about that study, the Gerlich study, was that they looked across generations, and people in the older generations were able to hang on to their critical thinking skills because they had developed resilience and independent thinking. But the younger generation, they said, really offloaded their thinking skills. Yes, I do think it's an issue, but you know what I'm saying is not that we can't use AI at all, but what I'm saying is we need to critically engage with AI. We should be, you know, assessing the AI tools in the same way as we assess sources. You know, why ChatGPT? You know, is it a better one than Copilot, for example? How, you know, where's that assessment? We need some assessment in there about what people are using. Yes, I think these things should be discussed in schools for sure.
Mhm. I have a follow-up to that from Michael. Says, NL schools here, we are certainly starting to have the conversation with students, just beginning though.
Yeah. And again, you see, this is why I think the writing issue was muddying the waters for me. Because if you take the writing issue away and you leave out writing, which I must say tears a bit of my soul, but anyway, and you just focus on thinking skills, then it becomes clearer because we're saying we don't want students to come out of schools or university without those thinking skills. I mean, especially in today's world.
Mhm. And we have, I guess, another follow-up.
Yeah.
Grade 8 parent here. English teacher gets all original writing assignments to be in student voice and handwritten on paper.
Yeah, I mean, that is a solution and people are doing that. But to me, that there's also an equity issue around that, right? Because, you know, not everybody can write in the moment, and not everyone can write in the same way by hand. So it creates those equity issues. But that is a solution that people are using now for sure. Um, but for me, I don't know if that's a long-term solution.
Mm. And so we had I guess, a comment there. The same can be said about people who cannot type. So it's the
Yeah,
same. Yeah.
yeah,
That same person had a comment a little earlier, said, I don't think students who are under a time crunch would worry about cognitive offloading. I
yeah.
teach adults at CNA, and they are juggling so many other things that this quick fix is very attractive to them.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And that's why I wanted to put in that slide about the pressures on the system, basically, the pressures from outside that um, are creating the conditions where there's no easy answer to this. Because that's, I mean, what you're talking about there is the product is important, the credential is important, the learning process is not. So some things are being prioritized outside of our classrooms that we have no control over. And that's why I'm thinking that if we make this concerted effort to bring the learning processes back, and the value of thinking skills as an employable skill, that might change things. But I think you're 100% right. That's exactly why students are using them. Well, I don't know if any of this was helpful, because it's something I'm grappling with myself, obviously. And I almost gave up on presenting this workshop because I didn't know if there would be anything helpful at all here. And I think we are all kind of struggling, and it's worthwhile recognizing that. And there's so much information out there. I'm literally attending a workshop a week, a webinar a week, if not more. to just to try and kind of reskill myself on this. But I do think we need to be having these conversations and thinking about it. So that's why I decided to do it.
There are many comments coming in thanking you. It was very helpful. Thank you. Yes, it was helpful. We are all grappling with this. Very helpful. Yes, thank you so much. It was excellent and added to my critical thinking on the topic. Cecile, based on your observations, could you please discuss any differences, if there are any, in how undergrad and graduate students use AI-powered applications in academic writing? If you did observe differences, did you create and use different strategies for teaching academic writing to undergrad or graduates in your teaching? And thank you.
I haven't noticed any differences, but I'll tell you what was shocking to me was my thesis students using AI. So these are students who have been through my writing course. So that's what made me think about this in this way is because, I mean, these are not students who are students who want to cheat, right? These are students who want to engage with the topic. They're really invested in what they're doing. So there's something else going on that's kind of opened the door and said, no, you should be using it. You must be using AI. So yeah, I haven't used different strategies. At the moment, my big strategy is really to beg students, don't use it. You know, and to talk about it all the time, really to have a conversation like regularly, not, I wouldn't say every class, but pretty much every class, around, you know, either introducing something about AI, the inaccuracies of AI, or various other things, just to keep them thinking about it.
A comment in the chat. I've heard that people are using AI to write emails on difficult topics.
I have no problem with people using AI to write emails. The problem is when they're submitting work as their own when it's come out of an AI tool. That to me is the problem. So, you know, if people want to use it to write, you know, things, that's absolutely fine. But if they're submitting assignments that are produced by AI, then I feel like, what am I doing here? And what are they coming out with? So that's the problem I have with it.
Oh, we have a hand up.
Arif, go ahead.
I have a quick question for you. So I use ChatGPT often as a thought partner, and other day I was playing with it, and I was actually trying to create an image of academics really tired of this soul-killing meetings that they have to go through, and I wanted to create a picture where they're coming out from a meeting room really bruised, and I asked them to create one, right, at the ChatGPT, that the first picture that they created is all white bodies, and most of them were wearing medical coats and that and had that, what do you call that, steps or whatever it is. So they're looking like a doctors, medical doctors. So then I was giving instruction. It was not fixing. And then I asked them, okay, I want to do this. Give me a prompt. Then they give me a prompt. I did it. But and then ChatGPT was having this conversation with me. This is like, I'm trying. Arif, don't get frustrated. I'm trying. Like, it's not coming. The algorithm is not creating it. Like, the way the system is built, it is creating what I know. It cannot come out of that. It is from within that space that what they have. So as I was having that conversation, looking at this, I thought, oh my God, this would be an amazing piece to show to my students for the edit course. Look what happens. Like, look what happens when you are dependent on this work, what you are getting and what you are not getting, what's being left out. It's many times it's you who is left out from and your voice, some left out. So having said that, and I was just thinking that, and I look at some of the Bhattacharya's work on AI as well, and the conversation, I guess the conversation is that, if it is an inevitable space, should we not filling out this space also with a lot of thoughts that is they are not capturing, and training AI in a way that suits that's is decolonized. I'm not sure if I'm using the word correctly in this context, but also like teaching the students on that context that, when you're overly dependent on this, and when it's making you think in certain way that system wants you to
Yeah.
perhaps think.
I totally agree, Arif. And I mean, that's where I would start, right? And that's where I was saying that those issues have become non-performative, because now we kind of introduce AI and we say, yes, there are lots of biases, there are lots of problems with the data, but, and then we just use it. To me, that is a massive problem. And, especially when it comes to writing, because really what I encourage in all my classes is an identity around writing that speaks to not just your voice, but to your whole history, and where you've come from, and the scholar that you are intending to be. Obviously, I'm talking about graduate students here, but to me, that's what makes good writing, and that's what makes that kind of intellectual contribution. And using AI undermines that completely. Basically, what it gives us is a bland North American voice that is homogenized, totally homogenized. Whereas the voice of the students is gone, right? It's gone.
Arif, just to interject a little bit, we have a comment in the chat that's directly to you. It says, "Oh man, Arif had the same issue before. Not only was it creating mostly white people, they all looked the same. At some point after 25-ish attempts, typed in all caps, 'Can you stop making everyone look conventionally attractive?'" So that was a comment directly on your point. We had another question or a comment that says, "Dr. Badenhorst, could you briefly address how the input of original information into AI relates to its output? Could it be argued that although AI refines the information, the original input remains fundamentally original?"
I'm not sure if I totally understand the second part of your question. But I do think it's very important to understand the data in the large language models, because we're kind of looking at this and saying it's information, whereas it's not information. It really is a predictive way of accessing words. And the large language models, what they do is in a very sophisticated way try and predict what we want to hear. And this is why there are so many hallucinations, because even if it can't find what we want to hear, it will still come up with something. So the original data, I mean, there are all sorts of issues with it. I mean, for one thing, it's coming off the internet. So, Reddit, I mean, people who are biased and stereotype or engage in stereotypes, misinformation, that's all part of the data set. Any of the biases in our language, gender, race, any kind of other marginalization is part of that data set. We should be engaging with that enormously. I mean, language structures the way we do things. It shapes the way we think.